What would you do if you were elected about Aleppo?
About
Aleppo.
And what is Aleppo?
That's US presidential hopeful Gary Johnson during a talk show interview. And what he asked was pretty embarrassing considering he wants to be president of one of the biggest stakeholder nations in the Middle East. But like him, lots of people don't know what Aleppo is. Let's address Gary Johnson's confusion. What is Aleppo? Aleppo is a city in Syria. It's not the capital, but it's large, populous, historically and culturally awesome, and a big deal economically. Oh, and it's also the epicenter of a massive and very expensive war and a horrible humanitarian crisis. Remember this picture? This child lived in Aleppo before a drone strike destroyed his home. He was saved, but hundreds of thousands like him weren't so lucky. Wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back a few years to understand how it all started. It's 2010 and the Arab Spring has just begun. Nation after nation in North Africa and the Middle East is toppling their repressive governments, and Syria tried to as well. I mean, look at President Bashar al-Assad. He's just as bad as those other guys. But Assad didn't take the people's protests lying down. He retaliated with his army, turning Syria's peaceful protesters into violent rebels. This was when the Syrian Civil War broke out. The country became flooded with Syrian armed forces, rebels and foreign separatist groups, all fighting for control. Now throw ISIS in the mix and you can only imagine the horror that followed. As if things weren't bad enough already, Syria's neighbors jumped in. And shit really hit the fan when the heavyweights came in to pacify the situation. The USA, who was against the dictatorship, backed the rebels while Putin joined forces with Assad. Few cities like this one and this one were quick to give in to the fighting. And by the summer of 2012, Aleppo was dragged in too. The city's security weakened, and before anybody knew what was happening, Aleppo was split between Assad and the rebels, with both sides taking turns to dominate the region. This brings us to 2016, when Aleppo is the main battleground of the conflict and the perfect reflection of the larger Syrian tug of war. And for both sides in this fight, it feels like whoever takes control over the city could potentially win the war. With all this going on, the world has a major humanitarian crisis on its hands. For those who stay in Aleppo, there's drones, destruction and death. And for those who try to leave, there's loss, isolation, and sadly, still death. Clearly, ceasefires aren't working because the horror just doesn't seem to end. So it's up to the next US president, maybe this guy, but probably not, to make some tough decisions. She, or he, needs to join hands with the Erdogans, Putins, and Merkels of the world and put an end to the crisis in Aleppo. And the crisis in Mosul, and Sana'a, and Aden, all the major battlegrounds of this heartbreaking Middle Eastern conflict. But how does one even begin to think about how to solve the worst humanitarian crisis in recent human history? Probably by knowing what Aleppo is.